Okay, here we are with another C# video, and this time with Tic Tac Toe and models and stuff. So, I guess I'll go alphabetically. So actually, in the content folder, because there's something that I did. So I had to make a new font, and I'll go into why in a second. What this works, and this is with monogame, mind you. I tried doing just like go. This is for when you win. So I tried just doing like a Windows Forms pop up, integrating Windows Forms in something that is not a Windows form, like WPF project, is a pain, as I found out. So I was like trying to find other ways to do it, and there's a way in monogame to do it. So that's what the sprite font is. As you can see, it's not necessarily a font so much as it is information for a font. So you can see name, size, spacing, kerning, and this is like if you make a dot sprite font file, this is all like it generates this. So I had to do that with the content manager thing. So I had to do this in the last one too with Content Manager when I had to add my own model. But this does the same thing basically, except for you just right click, add, and then see sprite font is right there. And see it's sprite font description. So like I said, it's basically just excuse me, it's XML information on a font rather than a font itself. And that's how Monogame kind of uses them. So I just wanted to mention that since that's something I did. And then games. So I chopped. This is mostly chopping stuff out and moving stuff around to make it more sense. And I just realized there's a small change that I'm gonna make. It's a small one, but I made everything private. And see, all var is now private and up here as they should be. And then I forgot to make input handler private because that's the last thing that I did. So at least I caught that now. Uh, so yeah, a lot of this is the same. Uh, because it's just same as it was, and then taking stuff out. So here's your models, uh, graphics, aspect ratio. I'd say I put them all together as well, just so it's easier to read. And then here's what I mentioned. So the font gets set up there. Then update. So here's the game loop. You can see this is pretty empty compared to last time. Now it's just the input handler and the if statement that I added for game over. So if I didn't even make a game over, it would literally just be this line. But I did add game over, so uh, you're either in game over or you're not. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then escape, it lets you quit. Then draw and see. I think this was like over 300 lines last time. Now it's barely cracking 100. And without the comments, it would be, yeah, without the comments or just with different spacing, it would be less than 100. So kind of proud of that. But yeah, this is the draw part. So if game over, it displays that text. So you get the message, and this is measure string, so that's how you make it center. Uh, well, that plus doing it like this, so you have to divide to a preferred buffer width, and obviously you got to account for text size. And then you use the sprite batch to actually draw it, so obviously the font, the actual text, the position, and the color. And that's it for the main. So I obviously made my own grid class, which is lots of the same stuff. So grid, selection, current, models, who won. That was all in the main. And well, it's technically not the main program, it's the main, but it's all in the game class. And this sets up the models, initializes a grid. Uh, well, that's what this says. It's just called in there. So it just fills it. So it's a 3x3 grid, fills it with dots. I've done something similar before, actually recently, with a self-study project where I did Tetris, and I kind of did the same concept where obviously it's not just three values empty X and O, I did the same thing where, 0, if a block is filled by 0, it's empty. If a block is filled by 1, it's a square block. A space is filled by 1 or 2, it's the like L block. And yeah, so this resonated with me, I guess is the word, because I did that for what I did. So even though it's not graphical, still having that grid to go off of is extremely useful. Or what I'm saying, even though the grid itself isn't graphical, using that to make the graphical elements is very useful because my Tetris was graphical. And then here the cursor, so it moves through the uh, array, and it we got a modulo by 3, so you can go left, right, and loop around. Then here, toggle selection, so that's how you switch between the XO, and it's called dot in here, but it's really a block. So get who won, so I changed this a little bit just to make it cleaner. Originally, I believe it was 4 if statements. I combined it into 2, and so this for loop, to go through this was in a double for loop on its own, and then this was, so these were in their own separate ones, I believe, and then this was in a nested one. Either way, I made it pretty much as clean as you can get, where, well, one, since this isn't really used again, this is created in here, grid val, just X and O. Then I did for loop and then an if statement with horizontal and vertical, and then since diagonals, you only check in one loop. I did, and one loop, and in the for each loop, this is length. I did these also in their own if statement instead of 2 separate ones for each diagonal. And especially for this, it made sense to me to put in one if statement with the or, because they were both checking diagonals. This, it still makes sense to me, because one, you still want to return player under each of these conditions, so having separate if statement doesn't really make sense. But also, since they're horizontal and vertical, you can, like, in your mind, they're similar, so having them in the same if statement makes sense. And then this being not in here obviously makes sense because it's in a different level of for loop, because you have to loop through it differently. This, you just want to loop through grid val for the diagonals. This, you do not, or this one, you want to loop through grid val and length. And then here, return no winner. And then here, actually drawing the grid. This is the last one in here, so obviously you want 3x3 grid. Thinking on this now, probably should just make this a separate value. Obviously, that's not a big deal since it's only changing, because this is by length. So, and still, as I say, it's only changing those 2 lines, but it's also changing these. Either way, that should be its own separate value, so you could easily make a grid of any size, but that's not a huge deal in a program this size. Though, I can see already that's 1, 2, 3. I have to change it here, 2, because this is 0. So change this to length as well. So you can see already it's kind of an issue. But either way, that's one I point out where that's something that I'll probably change in the next one, because that one's about code reusability, but having good code in general, regardless of how reusable it is obviously a good thing. And then this, I don't really have much to say. I don't think. That's just how it was. Get the location of them so you can draw them, and then have spaces between so that they're all not right on top of each other. So then also, this is a smaller one, but I made grid val separate since originally, well, first of all, personally, I think I understand why, but enums might be made in other classes, but to me it just always makes sense to make an enum separate. That might that might just be me. But also, since I was breaking it up, uh, it was just easier to have it, because it was before I cleaned it up. It was being referenced in the game, and it was being referenced in the grid. I think it might still be used in here, but I can't remember. Grid val. Yeah, it's still used in here too for making the model. So obviously, it made sense to make it separate specifically in this scenario since it's being referenced in both the grid and just to make sure it is being referenced in the grid, right? Oh, duh. But yeah, that makes sense. It made sense to me, specifically in this scenario, to have it be separate, and then also, obviously, that's just how I prefer it. Anyway, I talked about that too long. I'll just quickly go to input handler last because my model is the same, other than. Yeah, no, it's just the same. I was about to say I might have cleaned up the comments, but I didn't even do that. I didn't need to, obviously, but this is the same. And then input handler. So it's just that big block plus the little extra that I did, which I'll mention in a second, but it's just that big. It's this block of control booleans and then the block that was in the update that handled control. And I forgot to mention this because you can see it in the game class, but I'll mention it here now because I remembered now and it makes probably more sense to mention it now. But this out part basically means that it's going to modify these values. See, this isn't a return, but it's saying, hey, I'm going to modify these values and you're going to like it. These aren't, see, these aren't being, or I would say they're not being initialized, they're being initialized up there. But what I'm trying to say is that, hey, I'm going to modify these values in here. They are still global. They're still the values that you handed. They're not you know, this is setting it to false. If game over was true, it would immediately be false in here. So that's just how I ended up doing it because, I kind of needed to do it that way. Obviously, I had to find out that you could do it that way. And it's kind of one thing where this doesn't really matter too much. It's just the fact that it's kind of cheating a little bit because it's the reason why is you can see I'm doing two things. I'm setting two values. So if it was just one, you could just return it. And but for this, I have two, so that's might be an indicator that this is something that A needs to be its own class, game over and message, or B need to be broken up even more because they are doing two things. But for this scenario, I did it this way, and I'm kind of glad that I did it this way because I learned about out, but still, like I said, that is kind of a indicator that maybe this could be done in a, I'll say different way because I'm not necessarily sure if it would be better. Like obviously as a whole it would be better, but in this case that might just make it a little more clunky. Anyway, I'm just thinking about stuff. Here, these I chopped them down because they could be chopped down. Then, other than that stuff, it's the same, but I just dropped it down a little bit to make it cleaner. And then here you can see if dot means nothing. So if the winner isn't dot, because you see this gets to 1. So technically, if nobody's winning yet, dot is winning. So if dot isn't winning, get the winner. Game over is true, and then it does that stuff in game. And with all that said, how are we doing on time? 15 minutes? I had a lot to say, but that might be a little too long. Anyway, I'm just gonna obviously gotta show this running, and then yeah, I said a lot. So here it's these squares. So oh right, I also forgot to mention uh you couldn't move left or down before. Obviously, that was a pretty easy fix. Just had to add uh the left down, add the variables for that, and see this uh down is just 0 minus 1, and then left is minus 1 0. So yeah, uh X O X O. I'm putting down lots of O's. Z Z Z, and then look, O's the winner. Now you can't do anything, and then you can quit. I could have made it reset, but I figured that wasn't really a big deal. So, yeah, that is it. Like I said, big reset isn't really a big deal. You would just clear it, and then you would just run that draw again. So, yeah, that's it for this one, and see you next time.